In education, we often hear a lot about the latest science, right? The best practices, and this constant push to reform how we teach something as fundamental as literacy. It sounds entirely reasonable, doesn't it? I mean, who wouldn't want rigorous evidence-based science guiding how we learn to read and write?
Exactly. But what's fascinating here is that our source for today's deep dive, an article by Jaime Hoerricks, PhD, it's called Literacy for Sale: How the Science of Reading Became an Industry and Why GLPs Are Left Behind.
Okay.
It starts with an incredibly direct statement, really provocative. It declares, the science of reading is not science, it's a slogan.
Wow. Okay, that's a pretty strong claim right out of the gate.
It is.
Calling it a slogan and a corporate industrial project,
Yeah.
that really challenges the dominant narrative, doesn't it?
Exactly.
All right, let's unpack this then. Our mission today is to explore why the article makes these bold claims. We need to understand how the science of reading gets described as a decades-long corporate industrial project dressed in the aesthetics of rigor.
Right. And to try and uncover the mechanisms behind its widespread influence.
And importantly, we'll look at who, according to the article, often gets left behind in this system.
A group called Gestalt Language Processors, or GLPs.
GLPs, okay.
And why their unique way of learning language can maybe paradoxically make them a permanent market within this whole framework.
A permanent market. Okay. So what does this all mean for you, whether you're a parent trying to navigate school choices, or maybe an educator grappling with new mandates, or just someone inherently curious about how knowledge gets shaped and pushed out there? Let's find out. So the article, it really wastes no time laying out its core argument.
No, it jumps right in.
It says the science of reading, far from being some neutral scientific thing, is framed as a corporate industrial project dressed in the aesthetics of rigor.
That phrase really sticks.
Yeah. And it's designed, it argues, to cement phonics-based instruction into law. So if it's not science in the traditional sense, how does it manage to gain so much traction? How does it become such a powerful force in policy and practice?
Well, how does it create this illusion of scientific consensus? That's the key question the article tackles.
Right.
It argues that the widespread acceptance, in policy circles, it isn't a naturally evolved body of research. It's more like a manufactured consensus.
Manufactured? How so?
It points to how lawmakers, corporate training firms, nonprofits, ed tech platforms, they all cite it. They cite the science of reading.
Creating an echo chamber.
Exactly. It reinforces its perceived legitimacy. And what's particularly revealing is the playbook the article outlines for how this consensus is manufactured. It's something you might recognize in other industries too, not just education.
A playbook. That sounds like a pretty powerful blueprint. What does that playbook look like? What are the steps?
It breaks down into 4 key strategies, according to the source. First, capturing the legislature.
Okay, so lobbying.
Yeah, actively lobbying for laws that mandate phonics-based instruction and things like universal screening for reading difficulties.
Gotcha. Step 1, policy.
Step 2, controlling the narrative, using the press, influencer networks, to frame these laws as urgent, evidence-based reforms that simply must be adopted.
Creating that sense of urgency and inevitability.
Precisely. Third is outsourcing the science.
Outsourcing.
Yeah, which means hiring private research firms. And the article controversially calls these evidence mills.
Evidence mills.
Wow. Yeah. Hiring them to produce studies that conveniently meet federal funding thresholds, like those set by ESA, the Every Student Succeeds Act.
So, research tailored to fit funding requirements.
That's the argument. And finally, number 4, distributing mandates, not pedagogy.
Mandates, not pedagogy. What does that mean exactly?
It means pushing prepackaged trainings, scripted programs, strict fidelity rubrics into classrooms.
The one-size-fits-all approach.
Right. Often leaving little to no room for teachers to adapt or use their professional judgment or innovate based on their actual students.
So it's less about teaching and more about compliance with the package.
That's the implication. It's not just about teaching methods, but a strategic campaign, really, to shape policy and market demand.
The key insight here, then, for you listening, is that when you encounter something framed as evidence-based reform, especially in education, keeping an eye out for these specific mechanisms, the lobbying, the narrative control, the outsourced research, the packaged solutions, it can reveal a lot about the underlying drivers, right?
Thanks. Absolutely. This isn't how pure scientific inquiry typically operates, but as the article points out, it's very much how monopolies expand.
Right. And if this is a model of expansion, the article then pulls back the curtain on how that legitimacy is manufactured.
Yeah, by pointing specifically to these evidence mills.
This is where the intersection of profit and policy really becomes visible, it seems.
It does.
This is where it really gets interesting, I think. The article dives deep into how this legitimacy is manufactured, specifically naming LXD research as, well, a prime example of an evidence mill.
Yeah, that's one name mentioned.
And it describes them not as neutral researchers, but as partners in product design and marketing. So what exactly do these evidence mills do that makes their science so questionable, according to the article?
Well, what's truly unsettling, based on the description, is the process. The article details how these firms apparently co-create the product, write the report, validate their own results, and consult on market positioning.
Wait, they validate their own results?
That's what the article alleges. And crucially, it says they consistently avoid peer-reviewed publication or publishing a full report of their findings.
So it avoids the usual scientific scrutiny.
It seems so. Their evidence often appears in, slick PDFs designed to meet those ESA Tier 3 requirements we just mentioned.
Right, ticking the box for funding.
And these studies, typically conducted in non-randomized settings, often without independent oversight, and, quite alarmingly, with no mention of institutional review board approval, IRB approval.
No IRB, even when kids are involved.
Even when minors are involved, according to the source.
Wow. Okay, so an IRB is basically an ethics committee, right?
Yeah,
They ensure research, especially with people, is safe and ethical.
precisely.
The lack of that is a huge red flag.
It really is, and the article is unequivocal. If that sounds unethical, that's because it is. But, it argues, it's also highly profitable.
Profitable. How?
Because once a program gets that evidence-based label, even if the evidence is, let's say, questionable, it becomes eligible for federal funding. And that creates this powerful self-reinforcing cycle. Money flows to programs with the label is easier to get through this process, more money flows.
Okay, I see the cycle. So
Yeah.
you can see how this creates a system where there's, well, little room for dissent.
Very little. And even less room for learners who don't fit what the article calls the analytic paradigm.
The analytic paradigm. What's that?
That is, learners whose brains naturally break down information into smaller sequential parts. The way traditional phonics expects. Sounding out letters, blending sounds.
Okay. So that brings us directly to the individuals the article says are fundamentally overlooked by this system.
Yes.
If the system is so focused on this one analytic paradigm, what happens to those who learn differently? Let's talk about these Gestalt Language Processors, or GLPs.
Right.
The article says these are the learners who move through language in patterns, not phonemes, who grasp meaning before we grasp segments. Can you give us a more concrete picture? What does that actually look like?
Absolutely. Imagine a child who first learns entire phrases, or even song lyrics, as whole, meaningful units, like "Let It Go" from a movie,
Okay.
or "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," or even whole meme phrases they pick up online. They might understand and use these scripts perfectly in context long before they can break down individual words into separate sounds or letters.
So they get the whole chunk first.
Exactly. The Gestalt. These are children who, the article says, don't respond to phonics drills. They might guess at words, but they're guessing to reach for the meaning, not necessarily sounding it out. And they script, echo, sing, and associate. That's their organic way of building language. For them, fidelity is to meaning, not necessarily to the mechanics of phonics.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does the science of reading framework, with its heavy emphasis on breaking language into smaller parts, how does it categorize these individuals?
Well, according to the article to the Science of Reading framework, GLPs are often seen as data anomalies.
Anomalies.
Yeah.
Like errors in the data.
Kind of. Their learning paths don't produce those expected linear curves on the graphs, Phonics, you kill A, then B, then C.
Right.
Their fidelity is to meaning, not mechanics, which, within that specific framework, is seen as a problem, not a different way of learning.
So what happens to them?
Consequently, they failed the screenings, they get pulled for interventions, and they're often labeled dyslexic, delayed, defiant, or given an IEP for a specific learning disability.
Labels that might not actually capture what's going on.
Potentially, yes. And this is where, the article argues, the real economy begins.
The economy.
Yeah. GLPs are shuffled into tiered support structures, things like response to intervention, RTI, or multi-tiered system of supports, MTSS, systems designed, the article claims, not necessarily to understand them, but to recondition them, to make them fit the dominant analytic paradigm.
So their unique learning style actually ends up making them a continuous source of revenue for the system. Is that the argument?
Precisely. They become the reason to purchase another program, the rationale for the next round of professional development. They essentially become the permanent remediation tier and thus the permanent market. Their continued struggle, in quotes, justifies the system's expansion.
So the system needs them to keep struggling, in a way, to justify itself.
That's the provocative claim. It ensures a perpetual demand for the very products and interventions that might not be suitable for them in the first place.
Wow. Okay, so if the system is perhaps unintentionally creating this permanent market out of GLPs, what if the problem isn't with the child?
What if it's the system itself?
Exactly. The article suggests some alternative frameworks to help us think about this in a fundamentally different way.
That's right. One it highlights is the Power Threat Meaning Framework, or PTMF.
BTMF, okay.
It offers a very different starting point. Instead of asking the typical question, what is wrong with the child?
Which implies deficit.
Right, it shifts the question to what power has acted upon them? What threats has that power posed? What meaning have they made of the experience?
Okay, that's a very different lens. How does that apply to GLPs?
Well, applied to GLPs, the article suggests the power is this state-corporate alliance we talked about, enforcing one singular form of literacy, the analytic phonics-based one.
And the threat?
The threat is exclusion, maybe punishment, or the loss of their academic identity, their sense of self-worth as a learner.
Feeling like they're failing constantly.
Exactly. And the meaning they might internalize from this experience. The article suggests it's that they are broken, that their language is wrong, that literacy was never meant for them.
That's heavy.
It is. And the article describes this as epistemic violence.
Epistemic violence.
Oh.
Meaning violence against their way of knowing.
Essentially, yes. A system that invalidates and effectively destroys a child's natural way of knowing and learning, making it almost impossible for them to thrive within that specific environment.
So if we apply PTMF just practically, how does asking what power has acted upon them shift our approach, say, in a classroom?
Well, instead of immediately jumping to fix a child who isn't progressing with phonics drills.
Which is the default reaction often.
Yeah, often, yeah. You'd pause and consider, is the mandate for phonics first instruction driven by this state-corporate alliance the article describes? Is that the power at play here? Is the threat, the pressure to conform, or maybe being pulled out for interventions that don't actually suit their learning style?
It shifts the focus from an individual deficit.
To a systemic challenge, exactly.
Yeah. And then there's critical theory.
Yes, critical theory comes in too. It teaches us to follow the money.
Always follow the money.
Right. It reminds us that neutral in education is often anything but. It argues the science of reading reframes literacy problems as individual skill deficits.
Locating the problem in the child.
Yes. Absolving the system of responsibility, positioning the learner as the site of intervention, and basically converting educational struggle into market demand.
Turning a learning difference into a product need.
That's the argument. The article uses the analogy of enclosures, like enclosing common land. It says the system criminalizes those who exist outside its bounds, making GLPs the trespassers.
Like building a fence around one specific way of learning and calling everyone else wrong for being outside it. That's a powerful analogy.
It is.
What does this criminalization or exclusion look like in real classrooms then? The article shares some vivid observations from an educator, right?
It does. The educator describes seeing students who have entire encyclopedias of scripted language, lines from shows, songs.
Rich internal language libraries.
Totally, but they're considered non-readers because they can't decode phonetically in the expected way. Or high schoolers who can recite TikTok audio clips or song lyrics word for word, but have never been offered a single text that matches their language style.
So their actual linguistic strengths are completely ignored or dismissed.
Yeah, dismissed because they don't fit the narrow mold. But the article then asks, what happens when you do meet these students where they are, instead of just trying to fix them?
What's the alternative?
The article describes it really powerfully. When educators meet them where they are, apparently a remarkable shift occurs. Those scripts become anchor texts. Dialogue becomes narrative. Memory becomes scaffold.
Using what they already know as the starting point.
Exactly. When teaching truly starts from the whole to the part, starting with what students already know, already feel, already say, GLPs respond, they flourish, they write, they read, they reflect.
Oh.
They begin to bridge their existing language patterns, those gestalts, to new literacy skills, but in a way that's meaningful to them.
That sounds like genuinely responsive teaching,
Oh,
building on a child's strengths, not just focusing on perceived weaknesses.
it absolutely is. But this responsive approach, it won't be found in the Science of Reading playbook.
Why not?
Because, as the article concludes, it's not profitable, because it requires nuance, because it's hard to package.
It can't be easily standardized or sold as a one-size-fits-all product or training module.
Exactly. So the article outlines a different vision for literacy. One that truly serves GLPs by building from the scripts they carry, those TV lines, song lyrics, family sayings, memes, using them as raw materials of meaning.
Starting with their language.
Yes. It advocates for context-first teaching. Start with the gestalt, the whole idea or chunk, then map and explore its parts, not the other way around.
That's correct.
It emphasizes visual and auditory scaffolding, honoring rhythm, pattern, emotional resonance, things that are key for GLPs. And it proposes assessment not just as measuring, syllable segmentation accuracy.
Which is very mechanical.
Right.
Yeah.
But as noticing how meaning travels through a child,
Yeah.
how are they making sense of things? This is described as responsive, rigorous, and respectful pedagogy.
Responsive, rigorous, and respectful. I like that.
And crucially, it does not seek to repair us. It seeks to understand us.
Okay, so let's bring this all together. What does all of this mean for you listening?
This deep dive has really shown us how something like the science of reading can be understood not just as an educational method,
But potentially as a deeply entrenched industry that intentionally, or maybe not, can exclude and even monetize certain ways of learning.
right? It challenges us to look beyond the jargon, beyond the evidence-based labels sometimes, and question the systems in place, especially when they present themselves as universally scientific.
We've seen how, for Gestalt language processors, this kind of framework can feel like a dead end.
Yeah.
It can end up labeling their natural pattern-based way of processing language as a deficit rather than just a different, perfectly valid approach.
Yeah, and that raises a really important question for all of us, doesn't it? If literacy is truly about fostering communication and understanding, and not merely compliance or, profitable packaging,
Right.
then we must critically consider how we define it, how we teach it, and how we assess it. The article leaves us with a really powerful thought. What if the system is wrong? What if we are not broken? What if our way of knowing is not a barrier, but a blueprint?
A blueprint. That's a great way to put it. Understanding this perspective, it really empowers you, the listener, to think critically about educational mandates and maybe to advocate for approaches that respect and actually build upon the diverse ways all learners engage with language and meaning.
If the fight for literacy equity is not just about methods, but about power, as our source states.
Which seems to be the core message here.
It does. Then the first step in reclaiming some of that power is refusing their frame, refusing to accept that there's only one right way.
So for you, that might mean questioning a universal approach you encounter, or maybe just observing more closely how people around you, your kids, your students, even yourself, truly make meaning from language. How might looking at literacy through this lens, through the lens of power, meaning, and different ways of knowing, how might that change the way you interact with educational content, or even how you approach learning something new yourself, something to think about?